Like, yeah, you can call it Costco, but why wouldn't you call it God's store or God's warehouse and be instantly, universally, permanently blessed by God for doing so? Why wouldn't you just make a simple, wise decision to brand the building, call the whole company God's store or God's warehouse? Done. And make it completely abide, okay, with every righteous moral rule and principle as delivered by Jesus Christ, who is God in the flesh. Okay. And by all means, make it way more extreme in its Christ glorification everywhere, throughout the entire business, yada, yada, yada. Buildings, publication, you name it. Like, how much longer are we going to fart? Like, this is just so boring because it's not inviting the supernatural. Don't call the buildings Costco. Call them God's store, and then actually abide within and without and all through in by God's standards. For example, all the employees need to be allowed to wear all white all day, every day. That is what you call a God wisdom decision. Okay? If you're really good, you would actually encourage all the employees to wear all white. And the store is called God's store. Read the book of Revelation. Everyone and everything in heaven is all white, including God's throne and his appearance, and everything is all white. So here's how you invite the supernatural into a Costco warehouse. First of all, you throw out the dumb sign. You throw out the stupid name Costco, which is absolutely dumb. It doesn't make anyone think about God, therefore it sucks. Okay? So throw it out. Call the place God's store. Done. Very simple. Call the place God's store. Okay? And brand it that way everywhere. Okay? Have all of the employees in God's store wear all white, beautiful polyester clothing, okay, at the store. So they look like literal angels from heaven inside God's store. And if they want to have name tags, they can be gold name tags. But I've heard from the Lord so much about all white clothing, okay, and every human being worldwide being allowed to wear all white every day and actually walking off any job site that does not allow that. That's a word from the Lord. That now I'm just preaching the truth and the glory of God that would actually invite the supernatural miracles and presence of God into buildings and businesses like you wouldn't believe. And the reality is, you've never experienced the kind of miracles and glory and pleasures that will flow by God's hand when people actually do these acts of God glorification. So, number one, Costco warehouse, Costco wholesale, and every company in the universe, including Walmart and all of them, change the name of your company so it's called God's this. Nike, call it God's Apparel. Like, it's not that hard. I mean, okay, so done. Don't call it Costco. Call it God's store. And have all of your employees encouraged to wear all white polyester with gold name tags inside of God's store. So they look like clinical angels inside God's store. And people actually call it God's store. And therefore, the morality and the dignity and respect and intelligence and wisdom that starts to flow in God's store is extremely heavenly. And once it reaches a level of heavenliness and standard that is sufficiently pleasing to God, now God himself, with his glorious presence, will actually start to enter God's store. And you will feel the presence of God. And you will feel all the blissful feelings of God. And all of a sudden, your workplace isn't boring or depressing anymore, because God himself is actually in the building. And how did God come into the building? You actually invited him in with proper worship and rules and design. read the Bible, when God was sufficiently pleased with what people did, it says he filled the temple with his glory, and the priests were not able to continue ministering in the temple because the glory of the Lord filled the house of God. So screaming was the pleasure and glory of the manifestation of God himself that people were just so full of ecstasy they couldn't even stay in the building. Now that's cool. Costco wholesale. IKEA? Are you kidding me? Is this a Drabville? Is this a Depressionville? Walmart? Yes, it is. Change the name of your buildings and change everything on the inside, and God will actually start showing up. Business does not have to be boring. Business can totally invite the supernatural if you will glorify God in every way desirable for the buildings and the business. It all begins with putting God's personal names everywhere, without and within. Do not underestimate just how glorious and how pleasurable a situation can be when it's actually pleasing to God.